Chapter 3 The Archduke. The feast to welcome Dangerous was delayed by 3 days, thanks to a late shipment of spices and wine. Amira spent most of her time hidden in her room, watching from her bower window as servants bustled to and from. On the handful of times she ventured into the palace, retainers in the livery of the Archduke scurried from every nook and corner like an infestation of white-clad locusts. Amira tried to speak to the king, but it made no difference. No matter how much she begged, pleaded, and petitioned him, he wouldn't be moved. He seemed to consider her request that she be sent with Fonra as a servant, but didn't relent. King Hyle's daughters were both weapons in their own way. Fonra's marriage would protect their kingdom for as long as the Fandulian dynasty lasted, provided she gave Dangerous sons to carry it on. And Amira had already proven herself well worth the price paid to make her what she was. The night of the Archduke's welcome feast drew near. As she was expected to attend, Amira prepared knowing weapons were useless. Even if she stood a chance of finishing off the Archduke, her father had commanded her not to harm him. Instead, Amira set to work weaponizing her appearance. With the help of only one servant, all that Queen Hyle had allowed Fonra to spare, she lined her eyes with kohl and painted her lips with bright red cosmetics that put blood to shame. The servant, Chesna, didn't even blink when she saw the stitches along Amira's ribs. She helped Amira loop bandages around her waist to protect the wound, and then select a dress that flowed loose at the sides. Amira's breath caught when she saw the gown that Chesna held up. It was a black velvet dress, cut in the latest Aramaean fashion. The snug collar rose halfway up Amira's throat, and from the front fell in soft folds, but the back. The plunging back left Amira essentially naked from neck to hip, with only knotted strands of silver chain draped across. Though the dress was supposedly the style in the imperial city of Manadra, Queen Hyle wouldn't hear of anything so scandalous coming near her daughter. The dress had been a gift from Cromwell after one of his trips to the port cities. As with all his gifts, there had been no explanation or even a note. It had simply appeared one day in the hands of one of Cromwell's apprentices, delivered, "With compliments of Master Cromwell." That will do. Amira waved over Chesna, and the other woman hung the dress from the bedpost as she set to styling Amira's hair into a coronet of braids, with a few loose strands dangling about her neck. Fonra always chatted with her servants, no matter their station. How Amira wished she had her sister's easy charm, but no. Amira sat straight-faced and straight-backed, watching in the mirror as Chesna transformed her into a creature of beauty, grace, and courtly elegance. Beyond the door, she could hear Queen Hyle fussing over Fonra and her sister's attendants. Not just Fonra, but every one of her ladies must be in pristine condition to meet the Archduke and his retainers. Chesna helped Amira style a corded veil over her eyes, a fringe of knotted black and silver strands, a sorceress's veil. For generations, Amira's foremothers had worn them at public gatherings and formal occasions. It was rude to look a sorceress directly in the eye, and had started out as a way to remind nobles of the fact. Now it seemed more like a warning, like a bell on a bull. Amira was just grateful for something to hide her face. Despite having been raised in this palace with many of the people who now attended her father's court, Amira preferred the illusion of anonymity. She didn't think for a second that anyone from the Archduke's party would recognize her. Fonra would be the center of attention. Amira looked completely different tonight, and would be sticking to the edges of the room, as was her habit. She needed to protect Fonra for as long as possible. All the same, it was only by a miracle that her father had agreed to let her attend tonight at all. Amira wondered which of the half-dead votive candles on her windowsill was to thank for this small mercy. Had it been Eponine who had heard her prayers? Or Diane, the patroness of young girls? Perhaps it had been Teschner, the godling of etiquette and schemes. As a minor god, Teschner was supposed to be more attentive, even if he was less powerful. Amira arrived at the feast hall before her sister. The room was bathed in the gold of candlelight. A large brazier dominated one side, a roasting boar turning over it. Already, several of her father's knights gathered around the edges of the fire, their tunics and tabards emblazoned with the white swan of Highlandale. The white swan coat of arms had been a gift from Emperor Tristan. When Hyle had bent the knee before the invading emperor, he had been given a new liege lord, a new coat of arms, and a new bride. Emperor Tristan had been generous, sending gifts of men, horses, and hunting hounds, not to mention 10,000 sheep, formerly from the flocks of King Vespasian to the east. Vespasian had not bent the knee. His legs had been cut off at the knees in punishment, as had those of all the men in his household. That was the way of the Fandulians. Submit or die bloody. Dangerth's father had not founded the empire, but he had been the heir born with ambition burning in his eyes. They said the last emperor's gaze scorched everything he saw, branding it as his own even before he set foot on those distant places on the map. Tristan the Conqueror had died before his 40th year, but with no less than 1,000 vassal kings, each commanding their own kingdom in the name of the emperor and his co-ruler, Empress Vesha. Emperor Tristan had died in an accident not long after the conquering of Highlandale. Vesha had taken over as regent, and had ruled ever since. Many had expected her to step aside once Dangerth came of age, but it had yet to happen. The hall was done out in the finest array. The floors had been swept, and fresh pine boughs hung from every corner. Candles had been crammed into every possible sconce and crevice. A spruce finch fluttered near one of the upper windows, bristling green wings beating against the glass. Poor thing must have flown in while the servants were airing out the hall. The finch's body and the edges of its wings bristled with pine needles sprouting from its feathers. Just another aberration from another time, when sorceresses had lived free in Highlandale. Many had devoted entire lifetimes to braiding together bits and pieces from plants and animals, like village goodwives weaving their daughters' bridal rugs. Most of their mutants had died shortly after creation or been sterile, but a few, like the spruce finches, had escaped the laboratoriums to live, breed, and thrive in the surrounding woods. Lady Amira. The assassin stiffened at that voice, back straight and hands folded in front of her, in the position suitable for a lady standing idle. Lord Cromwell. He wasn't a lord, or even a noble by birth, but Amira, like most the court, wasn't sure what else to call him. I almost didn't see you there. The lawyer was clad in black velvet that Amira now noticed was disturbingly like her own, even if it did lack the silver embroidery. He studied the room like an old wolf studying an auroch herd, hoping for a stray calf. I'm glad you're recovered. Thank you, my lord. Behind Cromwell stood his 2 apprentices. She'd seen them before, but didn't recall their names. One was broad-shouldered and would probably be starting his own law practice soon. The other was slight and slim, and probably no more than 14. Both boys wore rapiers at their hips. Decorative, of course. I have heard that His Imperial Highness is in good health as well. Not a sign of the past month's travel on him. Amira inhaled a long breath. Cromwell was saying there was no sign Dangerth had been in a fight at all. Impossible. She had seen with her own eyes that his face instantly recovered, but impossible. The imperial family had no magic, and to mend flesh that badly burned would have taken more power than Amira herself could channel at a time, not to mention the skills of a master surgeon to knit the flesh back correctly. A quick round of trumpet blasts signaled the king's arrival. Amira's father entered with his wife on one arm and Fanra trailing behind. The whole family was decked in their finest silks and jewels, clad all in white after the imperial custom. King Hyle greeted loyal courtiers with a smile and the customary clasping of the forearms after the way of old friends. As he embraced Baron Alderman, a minor noble who had tried cheating King Hyle out of 10,000 gold shares last spring, Amira noticed her father glance to her. It was uncanny how the king could find her no matter where she was. Sometimes she wondered about the bond that stretched between them. She'd never had the courage to ask what he experienced through their link. Kadrahan were not supposed to question their liege lords. Queen Hyle smiled, her teeth flashing like pearls above the string of rubies dripping from her neck. She accepted compliments and courtesies from the men and women in the room, her gloved hands sparking with rings. Fanra was complimented indirectly through her parents. Supplicants praised her beauty while addressing the king and queen. According to custom, the bride-to-be must not be addressed until her father presented her to the bridegroom. The princess kept her head down at a demure angle, as was expected for an unmarried girl in her parents' charge. Fanra wore a white dress, brocaded with beads in the shapes of ravens, swans, and stags. A thick strand of pearls roped her neck several times like a noose. The ivy woven into her hair reminded Amira of the brambles that bound sheep for the spring equinox. Fanra was pristine, pure, and spotless, as all sacrificial lambs were supposed to be. For so long, Amira had been sure that Fanra's innocence would protect her. Now here she was, about to be traded off in the name of preventing another war. Amira's heart sank as she studied her sister, prepared like an offering to the gods, one step closer to bleeding out on the altar of peace. "Keep your eyes open." Cromwell straightened as the royal family drew closer. "The night may hold surprises yet." Amira cast him a sideways glance. The rest of the room was watching the king, queen, and the little bride-to-be. "What do you know, Cromwell?" "About him?" It was plain enough who she meant. "I expect you know more than I." That was probably a lie, or at least a half-truth. Cromwell had been present when her father ordered her to kill the Archduke. He had to know something. "The king has asked me to make inquiries." "All the things you do for my father." Amira flashed a smile from beneath her veil. "Sometimes it seems you even do his thinking for him." "I would be a poor lawyer if I did not, milady." Cromwell took her right hand and kissed her fingers in the courtly manner, not waiting for her to offer it. With Amira, he constantly scintillated between overly formal and overly familiar. "I must take my leave, but, as I said, keep your eyes open." Cromwell left, his two wards at his heels like wolf pups. Clenching and unclenching her hand, Amira watched him go, aware that a few of the nearer courtiers had watched their exchange. Rumors often placed her and Cromwell together. It was easy to imagine the court's two enigmas as allies or even lovers, despite the decades of age difference. But that had not been their relationship at all. Amira no more trusted him than she would trust a starving Kelpie. At the same time, she had often felt that he was the only one she could trust besides Fanra. People stirred at the banquet hall's entrance. "His Imperial Majesty, Grand Archduke Dangerous Fandulian of Erimea, High Prince of Galais, and Lord Castellan of Menadra." The herald's echoing voice sent a jolt down Amira's spine, and immediately came the hot sense of urgency to fight, draw her weapons, defend herself, protect Fonra. The assassin did none of those things. Instead, she lowered herself into the deepest curtsy she could manage with her throbbing side, copying the rest of the court. "Rise, King Renna," came Dangerth's voice, addressed to King Hyle, using the man's given name instead of his title. "Queen Adelaide, rise. I am glad to be graced with the countenances of your royal persons with my own eyes." The Archduke slid easily into the courtly speech, shifting his words like a carriage horse shifting its gait. The pleasantries continued, and Dangerth bade the party to continue. Just like that, the conversation resumed as people flocked to pay their respects to their future emperor. It had been almost 20 years since the last Vandulian had visited the kingdom of Highlandale. The last one had come to banish Amira's mother and enslave her country. This one came to steal her sister, and gods knew what else. The Archduke allowed King Hyle to lead him to the top of a raised dais. Fonra took up a place at Dangerth's left and a little behind him. The two of them stood with a step or so of space between them, not touching. As much as Amira ached to rush across the room and drag her sister away from the monster in a man's disguise, at least they weren't touching. The servants began to set the table, their starched blue and white liveries bright even in the dim firelight. There were no chairs, and it was a faux pas to sit in the presence of the Archduke. Food would be eaten standing until the Archduke finished receiving pledges of allegiance and sat to enjoy the night's entertainment. Her father had hired the best musicians, fire-eaters, and tumblers that could be found in the kingdom. But the dancing would be done by the ladies of the court, led by Fonra. In Highlandale, the role of dancer was the honored place of the lady of the house, or the eldest daughter. The assassin couldn't help but wonder if Queen Hyle would take up dancing again once her daughter was in Manadra. It was unlikely she would allow Amira to hold the office. Amira circled the room, never staying in one place long enough to grow suspicious. Dangerth paid his courtesies, or rather allowed others to pay their homage to him. He stood at the top of the dais with the royal family arranged around him, as a line of courtiers formed in front of him. There was bowing, scraping, kissing, and flattery, all performed with the airy ease and practiced choreography of a May Day promenade. Without warning, the Archduke's gaze shot across the room, and she could have sworn his gaze locked on her. There was no sign of the hellfire that had spewed from his sockets before, but it was enough to make her turn. When she peered back over her shoulder from behind her veil, the Archduke was speaking to the young man at his left. The second young man followed the Archduke's gaze for the briefest moment before nodding and stepping off the dais. With a clenching in her gut, she recognized the young man, with his black cane, as Sir Thaddred. Cromwell had told her last night that Sir Thaddred was the Archduke's bastard cousin, the result of an indiscretion by the Empress's sister. He and the Archduke were reportedly very close, having been raised together with the same nurses and tutors. Thaddred walked with a limp due to a hunting accident. His courser had fallen on a sharp incline and rolled over him twice. His hip had been shattered, and the horse had to be put down, but the lucky whoreson had somehow survived. Thaddred had gotten a good look at her in the tent that night, but it had been dark then, and it was dark now. Not to mention the cosmetics, and a half veil flapping over her face. He wouldn't recognize her, though the fear hovered in the back of her mind. Thaddred slipped into the crowd, his imperial blues blending with the rest of the throng. Courtiers exchanged pleasantries and competed at insulting one another while shaping their words like compliments. Amira stepped up to Lord Marshal Bardarrow and his wife, exchanging a few muted pleasantries with the couple. As his name implied, he too had Istavari blood, even if he was one of the untouched, not a trace of magic in him. Amira disliked him, as she disliked most her father's inner circle, but his wife, Istra, was bearable enough. A plump, smiling woman with wavy gold hair, she always seemed to glow. She had a kind of golden softness to her that made Amira think of a hearth goddess. A motion out of the corner of Amira's eye pressed closer. She looked up. Thadrid made his way through the crowd toward her, with little effort at discretion. What was she supposed to do? Flee? Her thoughts whirred. Perhaps it had nothing to do with the assassination attempt. Perhaps it was something else. But no. She assumed the worst, always, and she was usually right. Thadrid came closer, his hitching step and cane clicking against the stones. She tensed, but pretended to be unaware as he came up behind her, probably intending to be stealthy. The Lord Marshal frowned, and Istra dropped off mid-sentence as Amira felt a presence at her back. "Where's my horse?" Thadrid growled. Amira remained perfectly still for one heartbeat. How had they known? "Pardon me." Amira turned to face the newcomer, pasting a smile beneath her beaded veil. "I don't believe we've met." Thadrid shot a glance to the Lord Marshal and his wife before bowing. "Sir Thadrid Morani, at your service." As the man, the Lord Marshal introduced himself first. "A pleasure, Sir Knight. I am His Majesty's Lord Marshal, and this is my lady wife, Istra." Thadrid bowed to them both in turn. "And you, lady," he said to Amira. All the menace was gone from his voice and face. He was playing the game, at least for now. Amira dropped into a curtsy. "Lady Amira Brindonu, your lordship." "The second princess?" Thadrid's brow furrowed. Amira smiled past a tightness in her throat that had nothing to do with her curse. "My royal father is the king, but I am no princess. Not anymore. Not when her mother was a traitor who had refused to swear the vows of allegiance to the emperor." Thadrid blinked, not responding to that part. He looked her from head to foot, appraisingly, experienced. Amira had been appraised by men many times in her life, either as a predator or as prey. From the way he had shifted slightly sideways, yet took time to linger on the dress's flattering lines, Thadrid seemed to consider her a bit of both. "Will you dance with me, my lady?" the knight asked, offering his arm. Amira cleared her throat politely, canting her head as a proper lady should. "The dancing shall be later, my lord." She caught Cromwell's eye across the room. "Help," she thought to him silently. "Help me." Amira cleared her throat. "If you'll excuse me, your lordship, I believe my father is beckoning for me." "He's not." Thadrid caught her arm in one hand. Amira jumped, fighting the urge to smack him off. Thadrid pulled her close. "You didn't answer me. What happened to my horse?" Amira cast her face in confusion. She didn't have to feign discomfort as several nearby courtiers took notice of his hand wrapped around her arm. "Your horse, sir." "Yes, the one you took." He gestured his cane at her. "Right after you tried to kill my cousin, as you'll recall." Amira cocked her head to the side. "My lord, I'm quite confused." Thadrid saw through her lie like gossamer. A ring on Thadrid's left hand, the one gripping the cane, caught her attention. It was a signet, bearing the imperial seal or a similar variation. Amira could feel the Ka from Thadrid's body, coursing down and collecting in the ring. It wasn't hurting him, just capturing the excess so a sorceress couldn't use it. Amira swallowed. He'd come prepared. Even if her father hadn't commanded her not to harm anyone in the Archduke's retinue, even if she'd known spells to fight him, her spells would be useless against him. Thadrid nodded in satisfaction when he noticed her attention on his ring. "Yes, your magic is useless on me, and I doubt you'll be fighting anyone in that dress." How like a man to assume he was safe because she wore skirts. I would rather not scream, Amira said. Her assassin's tools were out of reach, but she was still a king's daughter, a lady. And a lady had her own tricks. But if you plan to assault my virtue, I have no qualms about causing a scene to scandalize the empire one end to the other. She straightened as she had seen Queen Hyle do so many times. Do you accost the sister of your future empress on the night of her betrothal? Thaddred smirked. It was a lopsided, careless expression that said he had done this before. The Archduke has said not to let you get away. I beg your pardon. Come, he wants to meet you. Thaddred took her by the arm. 2 Imperial guards appeared, seemingly from nowhere, and flanked them. Amira watched Thaddred's limping gait and the rhythmic tapping of his cane. She could have kicked out his cane from under him and driven her knee into his face before he could counter her attack, even with address. But not now. Not here. In front of these many witnesses, and with the protection of the Imperial seal, Thaddred was safe and knew it, not to mention King Hyle's command still holding her back. Thaddred dragged her to the edge of the banquet hall, as the servants brought out cushioned chairs for the king, queen, fauna, and the Archduke. The Archduke faced a tight press of well-wishers and sycophants, and Amira could have sworn that he kept glancing in her direction. Not Thaddred's. Hers. The assassin who had burned his face wrecked his tent and stolen one of his horses. Well, his cousin's horse, apparently. People will start to notice, Amira said, trying to tug her arm free of Thaddred's. He didn't budge. They've already noticed, came his flat reply. Indeed, a couple of courtiers, after having their fill of stares at their future emperor, now stared at his doubleted cousin, with the king's Istavari spawn in the corner. Do you plan to keep me here all night? Amira demanded. Dane wants to meet you. Dane. Just Dane, not even the Archduke's full name. No title, no honorific. He called his cousin by his first name as if they were nothing but logmen or silver dust sellers. Why me? He fancies women who shun him, Thaddred said flippantly. He is betrothed to my sister, Amira countered, letting a hint of outrage color her tone. My mother was betrothed to a Calethian count, but that didn't stop her. Amira smacked Thaddred's arm. It was a perfectly ladylike response to his vulgarity, but her curse didn't see it that way. Her throat constricted and she couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded in her ears and her face stretched tight. She doubled over, going down behind a row of skirts and polished boots, and nearly taking Thaddred with her. Thaddred released her and stepped back, cane between them like a weapon. Amira braced her hands on the polished stone, buffed to a light shine. Her throat released over several heartbeats, and she took a moment to catch her breath. Several heads turned in her direction. Amira schooled her expression into one of cool annoyance, as if she had merely stumbled. She clenched her jaw and stood again, arms locked rigidly into repose. Thaddred didn't reach down to help her, probably suspecting some trick. It was wise of him. She found her father's back in the crowd through the cords of beads over her eyes and glared, wishing that she could spout hellfire out her eyes as Dangerous did. Hatred welled up inside her, hot and viscous as molten basalt. She felt eyes on her. Her episode and the knight's interest tonight would make her the talk of palace gossips for a week. What was that? Thaddred studied her out the corner of his eye. Amira knew he suspected something, but couldn't guess what. He knew she was a sorceress, so he might reasonably assume it had to do with magic. But he probably wouldn't recognize her as a Kadrahan, would he? Rumor had it that the imperial family had a number of Kadrahan. But there would be no reason to suspect King Hyle had one. In a slightly less hostile tone, he asked, "Are you well?" "Delightful," Amira snapped. "I choke to death all the time." A little twinge in her throat warned her not to get too cheeky. Her father had commanded her not to reveal the details of her curse, and she needed to be careful. "Do you now?" "Never mind." The assassin straightened her chin, noticing the servants had finished setting the table across the chamber, and the lowest-ranking nobles were being served first. In Highlandale, as in all the Empire, guests were served with the lowest ranking being fed first, and the highest ranking served last. The crowd around Danger thinned as the minor nobles rushed to fetch their plates. The Archduke and his men couldn't be served until they had, and it would be unseemly to make them wait. "Come." Thaddred hooked his arm through hers again, locking her right arm against his ribs. Amira had no choice but to let him lead her straight past the fawning nobles' retainers and the shocked face of Queen Hyle to stand in front of the Archduke. Amira didn't meet the gaze of King Hyle. Neither the king nor queen at Dangerth's side spoke, breaking etiquette in shock or fury. Amira wasn't sure. When neither of them made to introduce the red-headed stepchild, Thaddred took the initiative. Thaddred bowed, and Amira dropped into a curtsy. "Dear cousin," the knight said, "may I introduce Lady Amira, your future sister-in-law?" Dangerth stepped down from the dais to stand in front of the assassin. She kept her eyes down, hooded by her veil. "My lord." There was a warning in Thaddred's voice, and he tugged Amira back ever so slightly. He didn't want to risk her attempting another assassination. "Lady Amira." Dangerth caught her free hand, her other locked securely under Thaddred's arm, the Archduke's guards within easy reach. She dared look up to find him studying her. "There you are." He bowed over her hand and his lips brushed her knuckles. It was a harmless gesture, a formality. Amira's hands had been kissed by more men than she could remember, but this one sent heat tingling through her arm and up her shoulder. He never once broke eye contact, studying her every second. A coldness gripped her gut as she remembered a voice so different from the one that spoke now, those eyes blazing with hell and hatred. This man had a steady, inviting voice, made for rallying armies and placating vassals. Deep brown eyes that beckoned for trust. He moved, spoke, and even breathed like a creature sculpted for a throne. Amira would never have suspected what lay beneath the well-bred exterior. "Your Imperial Highness?" Dangerth stared at her like she was some new specimen in a laboratorium, like the spruce finches and stilt foxes. He cleared his throat. This man who had greeted no less than 200 courtiers while barely pausing for breath seemed speechless. The Archduke and his would-be assassin faced one another down, the hunter and the quarry. As to which was which, Amira couldn't have said. He knew it was her, she realized. Somehow he knew. She didn't dare look to her father. She expected him to issue a command at any moment, but he didn't even move. "I'm pleased to see you in good health, my lord," she said. How had he recognized her across the room? That was what she wanted to know. "And you," Dangerth said. Was that him keeping with courtly etiquette? Or did she sense sincerity in those words? "I hope you will find your stay in Lashara pleasant." "It's had its surprises," Dangerth said, "but I'm most pleased thus far." He swept his gaze up and down the length of her. He hadn't looked at Fawnra like that. Amira hadn't seen him look at any of the other women like that. "You're very beautiful, Lady Amira." Queen Hyle squawked faintly from the dais, and even Thaddred shot his cousin a quizzical look. Amira almost choked. Her heart beat faster, and heat crept up her cheeks. "Thank you, Your Highness," she stammered. She couldn't return the compliment, not when she knew he wasn't entirely human. Not when she knew his princely beauty masked a beast. He didn't release her hand. Her fingers went clammy, and he still held on to her. Behind them the queue of nobles had thinned, but several dozen still waited their turn to court the Empire's favor. Their manicured faces watched the Archduke and Amira with both scowls and wide eyes, impatience warring with morbid fascination. "I don't wish to take up too much of your time, my lord." Dangerous studied her still, as if he dreaded letting her go but wasn't sure how to make her stay. "Will you be joining us to watch the brides dance?" By us, Amira presumed he meant himself, his retainers, and the royal couple. King Hyle cleared his throat, sparing Amira the need to answer. "Amira is among our most accomplished dancers, but she was recently ill and still recovering. In truth, I believe you should retire soon, my dear. You look pale." Dangerous' hand tightened on hers, almost in a death grip, but then loosened in an instant. It was as if she'd imagined it. "I hope you won't go far, my lady." Amira resisted the urge to shudder. "The palace is large, but not so large as to become lost," she replied, making a flippant attempt at humor. "Even if you did become lost," Dangerous said, voice soft and pensive, "I think I could find you anywhere." "That sounds like a threat, Your Highness." "Not a threat," Dangerous interjected. "Let there be no threats between us, Lady Amira." He inclined his head slightly, placating. Amira didn't know how to reply. A part of her, some shameful part deep in her core, was intrigued. He fascinated her, this monster in a man's skin. Perhaps because, in her own way, she was a monster too. He was her enemy, she was sure of that. But he played at peace very well. "You do look pale, my dear," the king said, stepping up between the Archduke and the assassin, gaze flitting between them nervously. "Return to your chambers and rest now." A command. "Pardon me, Your Highness." Amira extricated herself from the Archduke and his cousin as carefully as she could, backing away. A sense of leaving something behind struck her instantly. She hated abandoning Fonra with that, but Dangerous intrigued her. She had more questions now than ever. But her father's commands couldn't be ignored. Heart racing, she turned, forgetting to bow, and headed in the direction of her chambers. She expected Dangerous or Thadrid to order his guards to stop her, but he let her go. Amira left the feast, but she felt the Archduke's gaze follow her. She glanced back once, half expecting to see the demon's flaming red eyes, but instead, she saw only the Archduke, watching her like a man bewitched, as she slipped out of the room.